Brother muttered. You're poisoning the family. While I quietly poured the first glass of clean water I'd ever had. The faucet sputtered once, then the stream ran clear through the new filter attachment, filling the glass with that weirdly satisfying rush. I watched tiny air bubbles climb the inside like they were in a hurry to escape. My hand was steady, but only because I'd locked my wrist. Everything else in me buzzed. My brother leaned against the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, jaw tight. Behind him, I could see the dining room, our parents' silhouettes moving around the table, pretending they couldn't hear. Pretending they weren't the ones who called him in to talk some sense into me. To understand why my brother saying that while I poured that glass hit so hard, you probably need to know that in my family, we've been happily drinking dirty water for generations and calling it tradition. I don't mean literally, although, to be fair, the tap in this house has always tasted faintly like old coins. I mean the kind of water you grow up in when yelling is called communication, silent treatment is called discipline, and secrets are called respect. I'm 29 now, and it's taken me this long to realize the knot in my stomach wasn't my ungrateful attitude. It was my body screaming, "This isn't safe." It didn't start with filters and labels and me being the one who goes to therapy. It started with smaller things, like cups. When I was 8, we had these plastic cups from a petrol station promo, thin, stained, slightly greasy no matter how much you scrubbed. Dad loved them because they were indestructible. Which they weren't, as I proved one afternoon when I knocked one off the counter. It bounced off the edge of the sink, cracked down the middle, and clattered to the floor. The sound was louder than it had any right to be. Dad was in the lounge watching the news, but he appeared in the doorway like I'd summoned him. "What was that?" he barked. I froze, staring at the broken cup like it was a body. I dropped it," I said. "Sorry. I'll clean it up." His eyes went flat in that way they did when he was about to go off. "Do you think we're made of money?" he said, stepping into the kitchen, voice already climbing. "Every time I turn around you're breaking something. You don't respect anything. You don't listen. I say be careful. Do you listen? No. Because you only think of yourself." Tears sprang to my eyes. I grabbed a dishcloth with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," I said. "It was an accident, I promise, I didn't mean." "Accidents don't happen to people who pay attention," he snapped. "You never pay attention. Always in your own world." Mom came in then, drying her hands on a tea towel, taking in the scene, the broken cup, my wet face, Dad's red one. "Oh, for God's sake," she sighed. "It's just a cup. My name, stop crying, you're making it worse. You know how stressed your father is. Look what you've done to him now." And just like that, the problem wasn't that Dad was screaming at an 8-year-old over a plastic cup. The problem was that I'd made him scream. I'd made him stressed. My clumsiness, my tears, my existence. That was the first time I remember thinking, there's something wrong with me. Not with the situation. With me. You drink enough of that kind of blame, and it stains everything. My brother, Eli, is 2 years younger than me. He learned early how to read the currents in this house and float with them. He was the peacekeeper. The golden child. He didn't break cups. He fetched beer from the fridge before Dad asked. He didn't cry when Mom snapped. He cracked a joke, made her laugh, diffused the tension. The running joke in the family was that I was the intense one, and he was easygoing. What it really meant was, my nervous system screamed and his fawned. He learned to bend, I learned to brace. Growing up, I was always too something. Too loud, too quiet, too sensitive, too withdrawn. Too Americanized. When I disagreed with something cultural, too ungrateful. When I wanted something different. At 14, I tried to tell Mom I felt anxious all the time. I didn't have that word yet. I just said, "My stomach hurts and my heart races and sometimes I feel like I can't breathe for no reason." She didn't look up from the potatoes she was chopping. "You're being dramatic," she said. Go outside. Get some fresh air. Pray. People have real problems. When I got good grades, the story was, see? We pushed you, and it worked. When I forgot an assignment or froze in an exam and tanked, the story was, you didn't try hard enough. There was never a version where I was struggling, and it made sense. Fast forward to 25. I'd moved out at 22 with a boyfriend, to their disgust, ended up in a sketchy share house after the breakup, and finally scraped together enough to rent a tiny one-bedroom with a patch of balcony where I kept 3 plants alive and called it proof of maturity. On paper, I was doing fine, decent job, no kids, no criminal record. Inside, I felt like I was constantly about to get fired, dumped, or yelled at. Sometimes I'd get all 3 in the same week. The thing about growing up in chaos is you go looking for the same water in other people. I picked friends who needed saving and men who needed mothers. I thought if I could fix the mess in them, maybe I was retroactively fixing my childhood. Spoiler, it doesn't work like that. I'd always struggled with small life stuff. Paying bills on time, answering emails, not losing my keys in my own bag. But in my mid-20s, it all started piling up. I'd stare at my computer at work, frozen, unable to start tasks that weren't urgent, then pull frantic all-nighters to hit deadlines. My boss called me high potential, low consistency in a performance review, and it felt like being 8 again with the broken cup. Then, 2 years ago, my body just stopped cooperating. I started having dizzy spells. Headaches that lasted for days. My hands tingled. I was exhausted no matter how much I slept. I went to my GP, half expecting her to tell me I had brain cancer or something dramatic enough to explain how awful I felt. She ran basic bloods, asked questions about my life. I downplayed the stress, the insomnia, the way my chest flared with heat every time my phone lit up with Mom or Dad. I told her I was just tired. That's part of it, she said, flipping through my chart. But I'm wondering, would you be open to talking to our clinic psychologist? Just to see if things like anxiety, maybe some trauma, might be contributing? I winced at the T word. I wasn't abused, I blurted automatically. My parents are strict. They migrated here with nothing. They worked really hard. They never hit us or anything. She nodded like she'd heard this exact speech 100 times. Trauma isn't just physical abuse, she said gently. Growing up in a loud, unpredictable household can really wire your system a certain way. Also, I've watched you misplace your Medicare card 3 times in 20 minutes, she added, not unkindly. Have you ever been assessed for ADHD? I laughed out loud. No, I said. That's for little boys who climb the curtains. I was a nerd. I read for fun. She smiled. ADHD in girls can look different. Perfectionism, anxiety, chronic procrastination, difficulty with tasks that feel boring even when they're important. She gave me a look. It might be worth checking. Turns out she was right. Long story short, I ended up in a beige office months later, filling out questionnaires and telling a very calm man named Dr. Lewis all the reasons I thought I was just lazy and broken. He nodded a lot, asked about my childhood, my parents, the way my body reacted when I anticipated their calls. Your environment sounds high pressure, he said eventually. Not much room for making mistakes. I shrugged, defensive. They did their best, I said. They had it worse. My grandparents were nightmares. They screamed and hit. My parents never did that. They improved things. Sometimes the bar we compare to is very low, he said calmly. You can have gratitude for what was better and still be honest about what hurt. I didn't like hearing that. But a few weeks later, I got my own set of labels: ADHD, combined presentation, symptoms of complex trauma, anxiety, depression. A whole alphabet soup that, weirdly, felt kinder than lazy and too sensitive. The report didn't sound like my parents'. It said things like, These patterns are consistent with neurodevelopmental differences and adaptation to chronic stress. It said, she is likely to have developed high self-criticism despite significant effort. I cried reading it. Not because I was happy to have disorders, but because it was the first time something with authority looked at my mess and didn't say, "This is your fault." You'd think that would be a turning point. Cue montage of me taking medication, going to therapy, getting my life together. And yeah, some of that happened in small, unglamorous ways. Meds helped my brain feel less like 50 tabs open. Trauma therapy helped me see that the knot in my stomach when Dad raised his voice was not me overreacting. It was my body remembering being a kid. The real explosion happened when I made the mistake of sharing all this with my family. I didn't plan to at first. I knew, in that deep, animal way, that they wouldn't react well. My parents treat mental health like a made-up hobby. In my day, we just got on with it, Dad likes to say, as if that worked out great for his blood pressure and ability to go a week without calling someone useless. But secrets fester. I was tired of lying. Tired of making up excuses for why I couldn't come over every Sunday, work stuff, why I needed to leave early, morning meeting, why I sometimes left group chats on read because my heart couldn't handle another paragraph of Mom martyring about. No one cares about their parents anymore. It leaked out gradually. I mentioned to Mom one day that I'd started medication. She freaked out, obviously. "You're taking drugs?" She gasped, like I'd joined a cartel. "Prescription medication," I said, trying to sound calm. "From a psychiatrist. For ADHD. ADHD?" she repeated, rolling the letters around like a foreign language she hated. "Why do you need that? You were fine growing up. You always had your head in a book. ADHD is for naughty boys who run around in the supermarket." I explained clumsily about inattentive symptoms, executive function, how women are often missed. She shook her head. "You just need discipline," she said. "We were maybe too soft on you. Always letting you stay in your room reading instead of helping." I almost laughed. Too soft. That's one way to describe being screamed at for missing a speck of dust on the TV stand. Anyway, that conversation ended with her crying about how I was making her look like a bad mother, and me apologizing for having a brain, I guess. I didn't even get to the trauma part then. That came later, in a much uglier way. The water stuff, the actual water, started because I got sick. Not anxiety sick, like before, but physically sick. My GP ordered more tests, including heavy metals, because I'd grown up in an older suburb with dodgy pipes. My levels for certain things were higher than they liked. Nothing emergency level, but enough that she said, "You might want to avoid drinking straight tap water, especially from older houses. Filter if you can." It felt metaphorically on the nose, but okay. In my apartment, I bought a cheap filter jug and felt very adult. At my parents' place, I mentioned it once, gently, over lunch. "Hey, did you know the council is recommending filters for houses built before a year?" I said. "I had some tests done and my levels were up. Might be a good idea to use a filter here too." Dad snorted. "We've been drinking this water for 30 years. He said, lifting his glass like a toast. "We're fine." Mom shook her head. "Next you'll say we can't use plastic containers," she said. "This generation is so fragile. You literally have high blood pressure and prediabetes." I wanted to say, "You are not fine." But I let it go. Pick your battles. Then things spiraled in a way I did not intend. I mentioned the heavy metals thing to my aunt, Mom's sister, in passing. She freaked out. She and my uncle had 2 younger kids still living at home. She called the council, got all the pamphlets, and bullied my parents into doing a proper water test. Turned out, yep, their pipes were old and grimy enough that the levels weren't ideal. Again, not call the news, but maybe don't act like this is mountain spring water. My aunt bought them a fancy filter as a Christmas gift. My parents were low-key offended. Accepting it would mean acknowledging they were wrong about something safety-related in their house. Around the same time, therapy was doing slow, messy things to me. I was starting to remember little moments from childhood in more detail. Not new memories, nothing repressed returning, just clearer context. The cup. The time Dad screamed at Eli so hard he peed himself. The way Mom would ignore me for days if I talked back. One session, my therapist said, "You describe a lot of emotional unpredictability. Have you ever thought of it as emotional abuse?" The words sat there like a stone. I wanted to say no. To defend them. To say, they had it worse. Instead, I heard myself say, maybe. "Does it count if they also cook dinner every night?" She smiled sadly. "Love and harm can coexist," she said. "It doesn't cancel out the harm." I went home and wrote in my journal, trying the words on. My parents were emotionally abusive sometimes. It made my chest ache. It also made certain things make a horrible kind of sense. This is the part where, if this were a neat story, I'd sit them down and say, "Hey, the way you treated us was abusive." And they'd cry and apologize and we'd all heal. That's not what happened. What happened was my cousin posted something on Facebook about generational trauma. I shared it with a comment like, "Breaking cycles is hard, but worth it." My aunt commented, "Proud of you." With a heart. I felt seen. My brother saw it, rolled his eyes in the group chat. "Eli, here we go, my name," and her trauma again face with rolling eyes. I ignored it at the time. But my parents didn't. A week later, Mom called me, voice shaking. "Your brother says you're posting all over the internet about how we abused you," she said. "How could you do that to us?" I was at work, hunched over my keyboard, heart instantly in my throat. "What?" "No, I literally shared a meme," I said. "It wasn't about you specifically. You wrote breaking cycles." She snapped. "What cycles? We gave you a good childhood. We weren't perfect, but we did our best. You're making us look like monsters." I heard Dad in the background. "Tell her if she doesn't like her upbringing, she can change her surname." I could feel my cheeks burning, even though they couldn't see me. "I'm allowed to talk about my feelings," I said, voice small. "You're allowed to poison people against us?" she shot back. "You think your cousins don't read that and think, wow, my parents were horrible?" We went in circles. I tried to say, emotional neglect and chronic criticism, she heard. "We were monsters." It ended with her crying and hanging up and me sitting in a bathroom stall at work, shaking. After that, everything was brittle. My parents invited me over to talk properly. A few weeks later. I almost didn't go, but my therapist pointed out that sometimes you need to hear the thing in person to decide what to do next. So there I was, standing in their kitchen on that Sunday night, watching clear water run through a shiny new filter tap my aunt had finally bullied them into installing, and my brother leaning in the doorway saying I was poisoning the family. He'd been quiet during dinner, watching. My parents did the martyr. Mom talking about her nerves, Dad making pointed jokes about kids who think they're psychologists now. I tried to keep it surface level, talking about work, weather, anything but trauma and diagnoses. Then Mom brought it up anyway. "We just want to understand why you hate us," she said suddenly, putting down her fork. "After everything we've done for you." "I don't hate you," I said immediately. The old panic rose, predictable as reflux. "I'm just working through some things." "Working through?" Dad repeated. "By telling the world we abuse you." "I never used that word online," I said. "I've only ever used it in therapy. And maybe to Eli," I added, glancing at my brother. He didn't meet my eyes. Mom gasped like I'd confessed to murder. "You said we abused you?" she whispered. Something in my chest cracked. "Sometimes, yeah," I said, my voice shaking. "The screaming. The names. The way I never knew what would set you off. That's not healthy." She touched her hand to her forehead. I can't listen to this, she said, pushing back her chair. You're poisoning our name. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Enough, he barked. You come in here with your therapist words and your labels and you shit all over the people who raised you. You're poisoning the family. I actually flinched. Eli cleared his throat and said, Maybe we should all take a breather. So I did. I stood up with my plate, walked into the kitchen, turned on the tap. My hands knew what to do: rinse, stack, wipe. It's muscle memory. The new filter glinted under the fluorescent light. I pulled a glass from the cupboard, one of the old, indestructible ones, now properly cloudy, and held it under the stream. That's when Eli followed me and muttered his line. You're poisoning the family. I stared at the water. It was stupidly clear. Almost beautiful. For a second, I saw it the way my therapist would, metaphor layered on metaphor. They'd had to admit something was wrong with the pipes to put this here. A problem, backed by tests, bad enough that pretending it was fine wasn't an option anymore. Now they could drink safely. They'd done it for their bodies. For their emotional plumbing, though? That was still poison, if I pointed out the rust. I swallowed. I'm literally pouring water, I said, because apparently my coping mechanism is to lean into the obvious. He rolled his eyes. You know what I mean, he said. Ever since you started therapy, things have been tense. You keep bringing up the past, calling them abusive, sharing memes about toxic families. You're making everything worse. My hand tightened on the glass. You think it wasn't tense before? I asked. He shrugged. It's just how they are, he said. We all know how to handle them. You poking at it just makes them angry. And then we all have to deal with it. There it was. Not. You're wrong. Not. They didn't do those things. Just stop making them look. You know, when we got the water results back, I said slowly, the report literally said these levels may cause health problems over time. You didn't say then, you're poisoning the pipes by testing them. You said, damn, we should have done this earlier. Why is it different with us? He groaned. Because this is family, he said, lowering his voice on the last word like it was sacred. You don't call it poison. You don't go around telling outsiders we're toxic. That stuff spreads. It gets in people's heads. Like lead. I said before I could stop myself. He glared. It's not the same. Why not? I said. I could hear my voice shaking. Our bodies were slowly getting sick from something in the background, and we didn't know. Once we found out, the answer wasn't pretend it's fine. It was fix the source and stop drinking it. Why is it poison to say, hey, some of the stuff that happens in this family is hurting me and I don't want to swallow it anymore? He shook his head like I was missing the point on purpose. Because you're making them feel like monsters, he hissed. You know they had it worse. You know Grandma was violent. You know they tried to improve. And now you go around slapping labels on everything: abuse, trauma, ADHD, and acting like you're the only one who suffered. There it was. The scarcity mindset of pain. The idea that if I named mine, I was stealing some from them. I know they had it worse, I said softly. That's exactly why I'm doing this. So maybe their grandchildren don't have it at all. He scoffed. You're not having kids, you can't even keep plants alive. I almost laughed. My plants are doing fine, I said, because the alternative was crying. We stood there in the fluorescent-lit kitchen, years of static between us. I realized, weirdly, that I wasn't angry at him. Not really. He was still swimming in the same water. He'd adapted differently. His survival role was to keep the peace, minimize, deflect. Mine was to absorb, internalize, then finally, now, spit it out. You're asking me to go back to pretending, I said. I can't. I'm asking you not to blow up the only family we have, he said. You know what they're like. You pushing them like this, they'll cut you off. And then what? You'll be alone with your therapist and your labels? His voice cracked just enough that I knew that last part scared him. I'm already alone with most of this, I said quietly. At least the therapist doesn't yell at me for it. He looked at me then, properly, for maybe the first time that night. There was something like fear in his eyes. Maybe I imagined it. I can't lose them, he said. I can't do what you're doing. I'm not asking you to, I said. I get it. You're allowed to stay if that feels safer. But I'm allowed to not drink certain things anymore. He snorted. You and your metaphors, he muttered. I lifted the glass, took a sip of the filtered water. It tasted like nothing. Which, compared to the metallic tang I'd grown up with, felt wild. Look, I said, swallowing. You think I enjoy this? You think I like being the one who poisons the family by saying, hey, some of this hurt? I spent years defending them, minimizing it. I still do in my head. But my body doesn't lie. My panic attacks aren't lies. My diagnosis isn't a lie. And honestly, the labels I've gotten now? They're a hell of a lot gentler than the ones we grew up with. He frowned. What do you mean? Lazy. Ungrateful. Drama queen. Useless. Too sensitive. I counted them off on my fingers. That's what they called me. That's what you called me sometimes. ADHD, trauma, anxiety? Those aren't insults. They're explanations. They help me stop calling myself names for things I literally couldn't help. That's not poison. That's clean water. His mouth tightened. You always were good with words, he said, but there wasn't much heat in it. We didn't resolve it there. Of course we didn't. Real life doesn't wrap up in one kitchen conversation. I went back to the table. Mom sniffed loudly, eyes red. Dad's jaw was still tight. We finished the meal in a parody of normal, complimenting the roast, passing the salad, avoiding the grenade in the middle of the table. When I left that night, Mom hugged me stiffly. Think about what we said, she murmured in my ear. We're not bad people. Stop making us look bad. On the drive home, my hands shook on the steering wheel. My brain replayed everything, every accusation, every minimizing comment, every time I almost caved. The guilt was a physical weight on my chest. Maybe they're right, the old voice in my head whispered. Maybe you are poisoning things. Maybe if you just shut up, everyone would be happier. Then I remembered sitting in my therapist's office the week before, telling her I was going to this dinner. What's your goal? She'd asked. I don't know, I'd said. Part of me wants them to understand, to say, we're sorry, that must have been hard. And what do you realistically expect? I'd picked at a loose thread on the cushion. Defensiveness. Guilt-tripping. Maybe being called ungrateful. And what will you do when that happens? She asked. I'd sighed. Try not to take the bait. Remind myself I'm allowed to name my experience even if they don't like it. Maybe leave early if it gets bad. Good, she'd said. And afterwards, no matter what happens, I want you to do something grounding and kind for yourself. You're walking into the old water. Have some clean water ready at home. At the time, I thought she meant metaphorical water. Now I had literal filtered water too. I got home, took my shoes off, and sat on the floor of my tiny living room with my back against the couch. I poured myself a glass from my own jug, hands still trembling, and drank. It tasted like nothing and everything. Then I did the grounding things, texted a friend, wrote in my journal, let myself cry without trying to argue myself out of it. I wrote down the words my family had thrown at me and then, next to them, the words from my diagnoses and my therapist. Poisoning the family versus breaking harmful patterns. Ungrateful versus acknowledging harm alongside love. Drama versus valid emotional response to prolonged stress. None of those reframes will ever come from my parents' mouths. That's okay. Well, it's not okay, but it's reality. In the months since, things have shifted, but not in some movie redemption way. More like tectonic plates grinding slowly. I've gone low contact. Fewer visits, shorter calls. I don't answer every late night, call me, text. When I feel myself getting yanked back into old roles, peacemaker, translator, emotional sponge, I step away. My parents don't like it, obviously. They say things like, "Ever since your diagnosis, you've become selfish." They tell relatives I'm influenced by Western psychology. Like I joined a cult. My brother still thinks I'm making things bigger than they need to be. But he also sends me memes about weird childhood moments and sometimes, late at night, texts. Was it really that bad for you? I tell him the truth, gently. I don't know how this ends. Maybe my parents will never admit they did harm. Maybe my brother will stay in the house until they die and then have a breakdown at 50. Maybe I'll always be the difficult child in the family myth. What I do know is that my life is slowly, quietly getting better with these labels, and this poison they hate so much. I sleep more. I jump less when someone raises their voice. I can start tasks without wanting to throw up. I pick people who apologize when they mess up, instead of doubling down. And when I pour myself a glass of water, whether literal or metaphorical, I try to notice that I have a choice now. I can drink what I grew up with, rust and denial and blame, or I can drink something clearer, even if it means the people still sipping from the old tap call me disloyal. So yeah? My brother says I'm poisoning the family? From his perspective, maybe I am. I'm certainly changing the flavor of things. But from where I'm sitting, shaky and stubborn and still learning, it feels less like poison and more like the first clean water I've ever had. It tastes strange and thin and almost too pure. I'm still getting used to it. But every time I feel that old metallic tang of guilt in the back of my throat and choose not to swallow it, I know I'm doing something my younger self never could. And if that poisons the version of family where we all pretend the water isn't hurting us, then maybe that's the kind of poisoning I'm willing to live with.